This is the albums of 9/11. Episode 4, The Moldy Peaches.
The moldy peach theory. We're just mold on a peach. We're like a peach, and we're just growing on the planet. No point.
As evidenced by the last episode about Nickelback, rock music was in a weird place in 2001. Just 10 years before, you had an explosion of alternative rock bands into the mainstream. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, REM, bands that were exciting musically but also full of ideas and intelligence that somehow topped the pop charts. But by the end of the 1990s, as grunge gave way to post-grunge and nu metal, alternative's time at the top was over. A lot of people didn't even call it alternative anymore. Sometimes it was called modern rock, but by the early 2000s, a lot of the music that would have been called alternative 10 years before was referred to as indie rock. And one band that emerged in the 2000s under the vague umbrella term of indie rock was a duo of musicians called the Moldy Peaches. Their debut self-titled album, The Moldy Peaches, was released on September 11th, 2001.
There's no such thing as a harmless joke. There's no such thing as a gentle toke. There's no such thing as Panama Jack, who's got the crack.
The Moldy Peaches emerged from a particular scene in New York called anti-folk. A lot of hyper-specific music scenes were swept into the indie rock descriptor. In 2001, music as different as the quirky lo-fi folk of the Moldy Peaches, the punk garage blues of the White Stripes, the 70s tinged post-punk cool of the Strokes, and the pop-punk emo of Jimmy Eat World could all be conceivably labeled as indie rock. As we discussed in the first video in this series, the introduction, the Strokes and Jimmy Eat World both had weird connections to 9/11. The Strokes were forced to delay the release of their debut, Is This It?, from September 25th to October 9th so that they could replace the song New York City Cops, and Jimmy Eat World had to re-release their July 2001 album Bleed American as just self-titled. There were a lot of weird coincidences with songs and album titles and album covers from artists that released music on or around September 11th. The metal band Slayer released an album that day that was called God Hates Us All. The progressive band Dream Theater released a live album that day that was called Live Scenes from New York that featured the Twin Towers in flames on the cover. The album had to be pulled from shelves and re-released with a different cover. And then there was Party Music, the fourth album by the hip-hop group The Coup. The album wasn't released until November of 2001, but the cover, which was actually created in June of 2001 before the World Trade Center attacks, featured the group blowing up the Twin Towers. One of the members of The Coup, Boots Riley, actually fought to keep that as the album cover, but he was overruled. Boots Riley went on to become an acclaimed filmmaker. His directorial debut in 2018 was the film Sorry to Bother You. Now, a lot of these connections to 9/11 might just be cognitive bias, but the Moldy Peaches actually had a really spooky example of this. On their album, which was released on September 11th, they actually had a song with the unfortunate title, NYC's Like a Graveyard.
New York City's like a graveyard. All the voices like the way I play my guitar. You gotta pick shoot if you wanna get far. New York City's like a graveyard.
But of course, since the album came out on September 11th, it was too late to replace it. And also, nobody was really paying that much attention to the Moldy Peaches album. Although the album was released on Rough Trade, the same record label as The Strokes, a band that the Moldy Peaches opened for in 2001, they had a considerably lower profile. The Moldy Peaches in 2001 consisted of Kimya Dawson and Adam Green, two musicians who met at a record store in New York and who'd been making music together since 1994.
Like, I was like a poet and Adam was a little kid making songs, and then we started making songs together and like just making music purely for ourselves and for fun and having no audience, but being really creative and excited about it.
The band had gone through some name changes. They were once called the Moldy Peaches 2000, and some lineup changes, at one time featuring the lead singer of the Spin Doctors playing guitar. But the heart of the group was the singing and songwriting of Kimya and Adam. That pair stuck together through all the lineup changes and cross-country moves, And when a bunch of their recordings got to Jeff Travis, the founder of Rough Trade Records, he agrees to put out an album.
Downloading porn with Dave-O. Downloading porn with Dave-O. Put a latch on the door so mama don't know that I'm downloading porn with Dave-O.
The Moldy Peaches debut is a collection of some new songs, but also some previous recordings. Kimya semi-jokingly refers to it as their greatest hits album, even though it's their first. The album was mostly recorded in a basement in Washington. It's extremely lo-fi. It's sloppy, but it's fun, and underneath its messy exterior is some really great songwriting. The album is mostly very well reviewed, but it doesn't fare as well when it's reviewed by the website Pitchfork. We can't talk about indie rock in the 2000s without talking about Pitchfork. This was a website that had been around since 1996, but had had a huge increase in popularity since 2000. By 2001, it had 30,000 daily readers. It gave a pretty middling review to the Moldy Peaches album, giving it only a 6.5 out of 10. Pitchfork have often been mocked for their pretentious reviews and their super specific number ratings. Of the other albums in this series, the only other one they reviewed was The Blueprint, which they gave an 8.7, although they did give a very good review to that Mercury Rev album that I mentioned in the first episode, All Is Dream. They gave that an 8.5. They did review some other albums that were released on September 11th, 2001, like Ben Folds' debut solo album, Rockin' the Suburbs, which they gave a 6.3, the They Might Be Giants album, Mink Car, which got a 2.8, and then the highest rating they gave of any album released on September 11th, 2001, the Microphones album, The Glow Part 2, which they gave a 9.2. But if you actually read the review of the Moldy Peaches album, it's a lot more positive than its number would suggest. If you're not familiar with Pitchfork, this opening sentence to the review kind of tells you all you need to know. The Manichaean conception of the rock history says that in the beginning there was chaos, a turbulent cesspool of pop culture that fed off and eroded the genteel traditions of Western culture. But then they also say Kimya Dawson and Adam Green are the Sonny and Cher of post-millennial toilet humor. They go on to say that one thing the Moldy Peaches have going for them is their utter lack of pretense. It makes it difficult to criticize because, despite its terrible unevenness, what you hear is exactly what they intended. Then they end the review by saying it remains to be seen whether the Moldy Peaches can reproduce their achievement here, or whether we really want them to. But I can see the duo as one of those unexplained groups that disappear as soon as they've arrived and cascade through the years as a cult favorite. And that part of the review should have been amazingly prophetic. While the Moldy Peaches' debut album was critically adored, it didn't do well commercially. And they might have built on the momentum they did have to make a better performing follow-up record, but they never made one. The band continued to play together off and on, but while Kimya Dawson and Adam Green both released solo albums and albums with other projects, they never released a full-length album as the Moldy Peaches again. And as that Pitchfork review said, they might have disappeared. They might have just faded into obscurity if it hadn't been for one fan of the band. A fan that happened to be an actor.
And, Jason said to me, well, what do you think Juno would listen to? And I replied, well, the Moldy Peaches. And he didn't know who the Moldy Peaches were, and I was surprised, because he, had a...
Seems so cool.
Yeah, he seems so cool.
I know, it was all a facade.
It was all a facade. And...
You see, 6 years after the release of the Moldy Peaches' self-titled record, the actor Elliot Page was getting ready to shoot the movie Juno as the title character. The movie's director, Jason Reitman, asked them what kind of music they thought Juno would listen to. Reitman had originally imagined Juno listening to glam rock, but Elliot Page answered with one band, the Moldy Peaches. Elliot played him some songs on his computer, and the director was immediately convinced. He reached out to Kimya Dawson, who insisted on getting to read the script before she would agree to let her songs be in the film. But once she did, she sent Reitman CDs of her work, something like 120 songs. And so songs from the Moldy Peaches, Kimya Dawson's solo, and another Kimya Dawson band became the basis of the Juno soundtrack. Even the score of the movie was inspired by Kimya Dawson's work. Of the 19 tracks, 9 were songs written and or performed by Kimya, including a song from the 2001 Moldy Peaches album called Anyone Else But You.
You're a part-time lover and a full-time friend. The monkey on your back is the latest trend. I don't see what anyone could see in anyone else but you.
Kiss you on the brain in the shadow of the train. I'll kiss you all starry-eyed, my body swinging from side to side. I don't see what anyone could see in anyone else.
It was a weird, sweet little love song, with some oddly endearing sentiments like, "We sure are cute for two ugly people." But it also talks about shaking a turd out of your pants and contains the entire Contra cheat code.
So Anyone Else But You is the most popular song that I've ever written in my life. And I wrote it with Kimya Dawson, who was my Moldy Peaches partner. We wrote it a really long time ago, like we wrote it over 20 years ago. So it's hard to remember everything. I had like a melody idea of being like, basically just ripping off this bass line of this Skip Spence outtake. And I was like spinning it in my head and singing to the words like, I can't see what anyone could see in anyone else but you, which sounded totally different. It was like, I can't see what anyone could see in anyone else but you. It was like completely like not like that. But I just wrote it down in my notebook. And then flash forward a few months later, Kimya and I were sitting in my parents' house on the couch trying to write a song. And, you know, I was playing some chords, totally different chords. And, you know, I showed her that lyric and she sang it in this new melody that sounded like way better. And we were like, oh, wow, that's awesome. And then she started like, you know, riffing all these like lyrics like the part-time lover, full-time friend, which I remember like being like, oh, this is like so brilliant. You know, she was like really like on this great tear writing all these cool lyrics. And we always thought it was funny to do those like do parts because we were like, oh, this is just ridiculous because we just don't like have a chorus idea, so we're just gonna sing do. Like, I think it's in a way it's like kind of a platonic love song. It's, you know what I mean? It's like a song about like friendship and like spiritual love between people, and that's like in a way cool because like people often don't really write like all the like love songs are more like material, and this one's more like a spiritual love song. So I think that's why people like it. It's sort of like trying to be sort of like taking like love but from like a little bit of another dimension.
But this song was chosen to be sung by the two leads of the movie Juno, Elliot Page and Michael Cera. Both the Moldy Peaches and the Elliot Page Michael Cera version appear on the soundtrack. When Juno was released in December of 2007, the film was a huge hit. It only cost around $7 million to make, but made $230 million at the box office. At the Academy Awards, it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Elliot Page was nominated, and the film won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for its writer Diablo Cody. And the film's soundtrack was also a phenomenon. The soundtrack was released in December of 2007, and on January 26, 2008, the Elliot Page Michael Cera version of Anyone Else But You actually charted at number 91 on the Billboard Hot 100.
How did the Moldy Peaches song and the 7 songs that you did end up in the biggest movie soundtrack ever?
Kimya Dawson would also win her first Grammy that year. On February 9th, 2008, the Juno soundtrack hit number 1 on the Billboard charts, beating artists like Alicia Keys, Taylor Swift, Miley Cyrus, and Radiohead. Pretty good for an album of mostly weird little indie rock songs, a lot of which had already been released September 11th, 2001.
I don't see what anyone can see, anyone else but you. I'm Kimya.
I'm Adam.
We're the Moldy Peaches!